The silence of the elevator was a fragile thing, shattered by a whisper sharp as a switchblade. "Don't talk! They're coming!" Victoria Lane froze. One stiletto heel snagged in the doorway, her leather portfolio clutched like a shield against her chest. Her pulse thrummed, a wild drumbeat in the quiet. Her eyes, sharp from years of commanding boardrooms, darted to the shadowed corner of the dimly lit car. At first, she thought it was a trick of her mind. Exhaustion's cruel jest after another grueling 15-hour day at the helm of Sterling Ventures. Then she saw him, a boy no older than 8, curled tight against the emergency panel, his knees drawn to his chest, his wide eyes gleaming with a fear too heavy for his small frame. Victoria's heart lurched. What is a child doing here, alone in this steel cage at midnight? Her lips parted to speak, but the boy's trembling hand shot up, palm outward, his whisper slicing through her thoughts. "Don't say a word," he hissed, urgency quaking in his voice. "They'll hear you." The elevator doors hissed shut, sealing them in a humming box of steel and flickering fluorescent light. Victoria stood rooted, her pulse hammering in her throat, a stranger to fear, but no stranger to control. She was Victoria Lane, CEO of Sterling Ventures, a titan forged in the fires of billion-dollar deals and cutthroat boardrooms. Yet here she was, pinned by the raw terror in a child's eyes, her world of power and precision tilting on its axis. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath, as if testing the air for danger. The boy shook his head fiercely, his gaze flicking to the glowing red lens of the ceiling camera. "They're watching, always watching," he murmured, his words a cold finger down her spine. Victoria nearly laughed. "Really, Victoria? Spooked by a child?" But the boy's fear was no childish game. It was raw, real, and it held her fast. She didn't laugh. The elevator groaned, a faint metallic shudder, and in that fragile pause, the boy's voice dropped to a single, chilling word that stole her breath. Victoria. Her name. Her body stiffened, every nerve alight. "He knows my name." Before she could form a response, the elevator chimed, a sharp note in the stillness. The doors slid open, revealing a man in a navy blue janitor's uniform, gripping a worn mop handle like a sentinel's staff. His tired brown eyes flicked from her to the boy, relief flooding his weathered face. "Ethan," he breathed, voice thick with a father's unspoken dread. "There you are." The boy scrambled into his arms, small hands clutching the man's shirt like talons. Victoria stepped back, her composure fraying at the edges, her polished armor cracking under the weight of the moment. The janitor's gaze met hers, shame shadowing his expression. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, his voice steady but rasped with a burden only he carried. "He didn't mean to bother you." Victoria's chin lifted, her CEO instinct snapping back into place. "What was your son doing in an elevator at midnight, hiding like that?" she asked, her tone sharp, though her heart still raced. The man's broad shoulders tightened, his name tag, David Hart, glinting red in the dim light. "It won't happen again," he said, his voice firm but weary. "He likes to hide. I'll talk to him." But Ethan's voice, muffled against his father's chest, broke through, small yet unshakable. "She needs to know, Dad. They said her name." Victoria's breath caught, a cold fist tightening around her lungs. David shot his son a sharp, desperate look, his forced smile brittle. "Enough, Ethan. Kids make things up." He turned to her, apologetic but resolute. "I'll get him home." Her instincts screamed to press further, to unravel the riddle woven into the boy's trembling words. But exhaustion tangled with irritation, and she straightened, her voice cutting clean. "See that you do. And keep him out of places he doesn't belong." Her heels struck the marble lobby floor like hammer blows as she strode toward the glass doors of Sterling Ventures' Chicago headquarters. Yet Ethan's whisper clung to her, a stubborn echo in her mind. "They said your name." Outside, the city pulsed with neon and traffic, a saxophone's mournful wail bleeding through the night. Her driver held open the sedan door, but Victoria lingered, staring at her reflection in the tinted glass. Victoria Lane, the woman who had clawed her way through betrayal, broken promises, and family greed, was not one to be shaken. She had built walls too high for any whisper to breach. And yet a child's voice had slipped through, effortless and piercing. Behind her, David crouched beside his son, his voice soft but firm. "You can't say things like that to strangers, Ethan. Especially not her." Ethan's wide eyes brimmed with something deeper than imagination, a truth too heavy for his small shoulders. "But Dad, I heard them. They said Miss Lane's name. They said tomorrow she'll sign." And then he faltered, his voice trailing into the dark. David's tone sharpened, not with anger but with fear, his eyes flicking toward the dozing security guard. "We'll talk at home." Ethan nodded, reluctant, his small hands fisting his father's sleeve. David exhaled, a man accustomed to cleaning messes no one else noticed. But tonight was different. He saw it in his son's trembling frame, in the fleeting glance Victoria had cast back. Just once, but enough to betray she'd heard more than she wanted. Victoria slid into the sedan, the leather cool against her skin. Her phone lay untouched in her bag, its notifications irrelevant against the weight of Ethan's words. She stared out at the glass tower she'd built, its gleaming walls a monument to her empire. But for the first time, a crack of doubt split her certainty. How much of this power is truly mine? Fear, an old enemy she'd long banished, edged into her heart. "Tomorrow she'll sign." Ethan's voice echoed like a prophecy, unyielding and haunting. The car pulled away, the tower shrinking in the rear view. But her thoughts remained trapped in that elevator, locked with a boy who shouldn't have known her name, and a janitor whose eyes carried a story untold. Something was coming. She could feel it in her bones, a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. The night bled into a gray dawn, but sleep refused to claim Victoria Lane. Her mind replayed the elevator scene in a relentless loop. Ethan's wide, knowing eyes, his urgent whisper, the way her name had fallen from his lips like a warning carved in stone. By sunrise, she stood before her mirror, adjusting the collar of her tailored suit, the woman staring back a stranger. Her face was flawless, her posture unyielding, but her eyes betrayed her. Doubt, sharp and unfamiliar, glinted in their depths. Across the city, David Hart walked Ethan to school under a drizzle-soaked autumn sky. The sidewalks shimmered, leaves crunching underfoot. The silence between father and son heavy with unspoken truths. "You shouldn't have said her name," David muttered, his voice low, strained with the weight of a father's fear. Ethan clutched his backpack straps, his small shoulders stiff with defiance. "But I heard them, Dad. In that big office with the glass wall, the man with the silver tie, the woman with the red nails. They said tomorrow she'll sign, and then she won't own anything anymore." David froze at the corner, the words slicing through him like a live wire. He knelt, gripping his son's shoulders, his voice urgent but soft. "Ethan, listen to me. You can't say things like that. People will think you're making it up. And people like her, people at the top, they don't listen to a janitor's son." Ethan's lip trembled, but his eyes held steady, burning with a truth too big for his small frame. "I wasn't making it up. I know what I heard." David closed his eyes, his late wife's voice whispering in his memory. "Never teach him to silence the truth, even if the world doesn't want to hear it." He exhaled, long and slow. "I believe you," he said, his voice softening. "I just don't want you to get hurt." Ethan leaned closer, his whisper echoing the elevator's urgency. "They were laughing, Dad, like she was stupid, like she was nothing." His small fist clenched, his voice trembling with a child's fierce justice. "Grandma always said if you see someone getting stepped on, you help, because next time, it could be you." David's throat tightened, his mother's wisdom alive in his son's heart more than his own. The boy's courage was a mirror, reflecting a strength David had buried long ago. Later that morning, Victoria stepped into the 35th floor boardroom of Sterling Ventures, her heels striking the polished marble like a metronome of power. Vincent Gray, her COO, rose with a smile too smooth, his silver tie catching the light like a blade. Beside him, Laura Bennett, her CFO, shuffled contracts, her crimson nails tapping a rhythm of calculated precision. "Victoria," Vincent said, his voice gliding like oil, "we're right on schedule. Tomorrow's signing will put Sterling Ventures on the global map. The Singapore investors are thrilled. You'll have nothing to worry about. Her gaze locked on his tie, then Laura's nails, and Ethan's whisper rushed back like a cold wind. The man with the silver tie, the woman with the red nails. Her heart thundered, but she forced a smile, her mask of control flawless. I'll review everything tonight, she said, her voice steady. No surprises. For a heartbeat, Vincent's grin faltered, a crack in his polished veneer, before snapping back into place. Of course, he said. Trust us. We've handled every detail. All you need to do is sign. Laura slid the folder toward her, yellow tabs marking the pages like beacons. Simple, clean, she said, her voice sweet, rehearsed, a trap wrapped in silk. Victoria's hand hovered above the folder, but she didn't touch it. Instead, she leaned back, her eyes narrowing. 10 years, Laura. 15 with you, Vincent. I've trusted you both more than anyone. Tell me, what do you call someone who trusts without looking? Vincent chuckled, soft and smooth, but his eyes were unreadable. A wise leader, he said, one who doesn't waste time micromanaging. But the air between them crackled, heavy with truths unspoken, and Victoria felt the weight of Ethan's warning settle deeper, a quiet fire kindling in her chest. The night draped Chicago in a restless hush, the boardroom's glow long extinguished. Victoria Lane returned to the marble lobby of Sterling Ventures, where the hum of fluorescent bulbs buzzed like a distant heartbeat. The vast space was nearly empty, save for David Hart, mopping near the entrance, his broad shoulders bent under the weight of unseen burdens. On a nearby bench, Ethan Hart sat hunched over a crumpled sheet of paper, his small hands smudged with pencil lead, sketching with the intensity of a boy guarding a secret. Victoria hesitated, her heels silent on the polished floor, then stepped closer, her voice soft but piercing. Mr. Hart, she said. David straightened, startled, his tired eyes meeting hers. Ma'am? Her gaze drifted to Ethan, who looked up, his wide eyes glinting with a truth too heavy for his 8 years. You, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What exactly did you hear? David stiffened, his jaw tightening like a man bracing for a storm. He's just a kid. Imagination runs wild at that age. Ethan shook his head resolute. I heard them. The man with the silver tie, the woman with the red nails. They said your name, Miss Lane. They said tomorrow you'd sign without reading. The lobby seemed to contract, the drip of mop water and the faint buzz of a dying light amplifying the weight of his words. Victoria's pulse quickened, a sharp staccato against her ribs. Why would you say that? She pressed, her voice soft but unyielding. Ethan's gaze held steady, small but unshakable. Because when people think you're invisible, they talk like no one's listening. But I was there. I listened. Her breath caught, snagged on the raw honesty in his eyes. She searched his solemn face, finding no trace of mischief, only a truth that cut deeper than any corporate betrayal. Slowly, her gaze turned to David. Why would he lie about something like this? She whispered, her voice trembling with a vulnerability she hadn't allowed in years. David's jaw clenched, his eyes flickering between his son and the woman who commanded an empire. Sometimes kids see what adults are too busy or too blind to notice, he said, his voice low, heavy with a father's quiet pride and fear. For the first time in years, Victoria felt exposed, her carefully constructed walls crumbling under the weight of a child's warning. Ethan's words echoed louder than the marble silence, and with chilling clarity, one truth pierced her defenses. The janitor's son might have just saved her from losing everything. Morning sunlight flooded through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sterling Ventures, painting Chicago's skyline in a golden haze of ambition. For most, it was a vision of triumph. For Victoria Lane, it was a stark reminder of how far she had climbed and how swiftly she could fall. She stood at the head of the boardroom table, her hand resting on the cool glass, Ethan Hart's warning looping in her mind like a relentless reel. They said your name. Tomorrow you'll sign without reading. She tried to dismiss it as a child's fantasy, but the tremor in his voice, the quiet gravity in David's eyes, gnawed at her like a splinter under skin. Vincent Gray sat with his usual poise, his silver tie gleaming like a polished blade. Across from him, Laura Bennett tapped crimson nails against a folder, each click a sharp warning, details Victoria had once ignored, now ringing like alarms. "Victoria," Vincent said, rising with a warmth too practiced, "you look like you're carrying the weight of the world. After tomorrow, it'll be lighter. This deal is perfect." She forced a smile, her heart a tight knot. "I'll be reviewing the contracts again tonight. Every clause." For a fleeting moment, his smile cracked, a fracture in his flawless facade, before snapping back. "Of course," he said, "but you don't need to drown in technicalities. That's why you have us. Trust is the cornerstone of leadership." Laura's voice slid in, sweet as honey, sharp as glass. "We flagged every page with yellow tabs. All you'll need is a pen. Efficiency is power, Victoria." Her words, meant as reassurance, landed like a veiled threat. "Yellow tabs." Ethan's voice echoed in her head. "They said you'd sign without reading." Victoria held her composure, her voice steady as steel. 10 years, Laura. 15 with you, Vincent. Do you know what trust feels like when it breaks? Like glass. It shatters, and when it does, everyone bleeds." The room fell silent, the air taut with unspoken truths. Vincent laughed, light and rehearsed, but his eyes held no humor. "Always the poet," he said, "but nothing will break tomorrow." That evening, alone in her office, Victoria stared out at Chicago's glittering lights, the city's pulse a mirror to her own. The folder lay open on her desk, yellow tabs glowing like warning lights in the dimness. She skimmed the dense legal text, but the words blurred, her mind caught in a storm of doubt. She was Victoria Lane, the woman who never second-guessed, who had built an empire from the ashes of betrayal. So why did her pen refuse to move? Her phone buzzed, a message from Vincent. "Trust us. We'll make you proud tomorrow." Then Laura. "Everything's ready. You'll shine in front of the investors." Words once comforting now tasted like poison, cloaked in silk. She thought of Ethan's solemn eyes, his voice small but searing. They laughed. They said your name. Her reflection in the glass window was flawless, but beneath it, she saw the fracture, a crack in the armor she'd worn for years. The next morning in the marble lobby, she spotted David mopping near the doors, Ethan nearby, hunched over his notebook, pencil scratching furiously. She hesitated, then approached, her voice low. "Mr. Hart." David looked up, surprised. "Ma'am?" Her gaze fell to Ethan, who met her eyes with quiet resolve. "May I ask again, what exactly did you hear?" David's jaw tightened, protective instinct flaring. "With respect, Miss Lane, my boy's had enough. He hides in corners because kids push him around. Yes, he hears things, but you can't base decisions on that." Ethan's voice cut through, soft but steady. "They said you were stupid, that you'd sign, and the day after, you wouldn't have a job." Victoria's chest constricted, the boy's words mirroring Vincent's message. "Trust us." She crouched, meeting Ethan's gaze, her voice gentle but urgent. "Why tell me? You don't even know me." Ethan's expression didn't waver, his eyes carrying a wisdom beyond his years. "Because I know what it's like when people treat you like you don't matter. They think you won't notice, but you do. And if you can help, you should." His words pierced deeper than any boardroom barb, striking at the core of her guarded heart. She rose slowly, her throat tight, and met David's gaze. He offered no persuasion, only a weary honesty that spoke louder than words. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the smallest voices carry warnings the rest of us are too proud to hear." Her heels echoed across the lobby as she walked away, but her heart no longer beat with its usual steady rhythm. For the first time, Victoria Lane wasn't sure if tomorrow would crown her triumph or herald her downfall. The fluorescent light in the service hallway flickered, its weary hum a counterpoint to the sharp tang of bleach that clung to the air. Victoria had always despised this part of the building. Low ceilings, gray walls, a realm beneath her station, reserved for those who toiled in the shadows of her empire. Yet tonight, here she was, trapped in a stalled elevator, the steel box lurching to a halt between floors with a jarring thud. Panic clawed at her ribs as she reached for the emergency button, but a voice floated up through the shaft, steady and calm. "Hold on, don't move." Moments later, the hatch creaked open, and a hand reached in. David Hart, Janitor by day, now framed by the glow of a portable lamp, his face a study in quiet resolve. "Step carefully, Miss Lane," he said. "I'll get you out." She bristled, her CEO instincts flaring. She gave orders, not took them. But in that suspended steel coffin, she gripped his calloused hand, strong and unshaking, and let him guide her through the hatch, her weight nothing in his steady grasp. When her heels met solid ground, she pulled away, her tone sharp to mask the tremor in her chest. "What kind of building are you running here, Hart? Elevators stalling like it's the 70s. David's lips curved faintly, a smile born of resilience rather than amusement. "The systems are old. They do what they can. Lucky for you, I know my way around them." Victoria arched a brow, curiosity cutting through her irritation. "You know your way around a mop. I didn't realize elevators were in your job description." He crouched, opening a panel, his flashlight slicing through a tangle of wires. His hands moved with practiced precision, testing, adjusting, coaxing life back into the circuits. Sparks flared briefly, then settled into order. "That's not janitor work," she said, her voice softer, intrigued. David didn't look up. "No," he admitted. "It isn't." She pressed, sensing a story beneath his steady exterior. "You've done this before." He paused, meeting her gaze, his eyes carrying a gravity that silenced her sarcasm. "I used to be an industrial electrician, worked on power grids, construction sites, even corporate towers like this one." She folded her arms, studying him, the weight of his words sinking in. "So why trade that for pushing a mop?" The elevator hummed back to life, smooth and alive. He closed the panel and rose, his shoulders stark against the harsh light. "My wife got sick," he said simply. "Cancer. By the time we found it, it was too late. When she passed, Ethan was 6. He needed me more than any company did. So I quit. Took work that let me be home every night. Work that didn't swallow me whole." His words landed like stones in her chest, heavy with sacrifice. Victoria had expected excuses, perhaps resentment. Instead, she found a man who had chosen love over ambition, a choice she'd never dared to make. "You gave up everything," she said, her voice softer than she intended, a crack in her armor. David shook his head, resolute. "No, I chose. There's a difference. A career can be rebuilt. A little boy's childhood can't." She turned away, her throat tight, the rain hammering against a nearby window, mirroring the storm in her thoughts. Her father's betrayal surfaced, sharp as shattered glass. The day he'd signed away her family's legacy under the guise of strategy. She had vowed never to be blind again, never to prioritize people over numbers. Yet here stood a man who had done the opposite, placing his son above all else, no matter the cost. "Does Ethan know?" she asked quietly. David exhaled, his voice steady but tender. "He knows his dad used to work with machines. He doesn't know I gave it all up for him. He just knows I'm there when he wakes up at night." There was no self-pity, no pride, just truth, raw and unadorned. "You don't even realize it," Victoria murmured almost to herself. "You make the rest of us look hollow." His gaze didn't flinch. "I'm not here to make anyone look like anything. I'm just trying to raise my son right." The elevator chimed down the hall, now alive and ready. She should have walked away, but her voice held her in place, sharp again to mask the vulnerability creeping in. "If you were still the man you used to be, what would you say if people you trusted were plotting against you?" David tilted his head, considering, then spoke with the steady calm of a man who had tamed live wires. "I'd listen to the quiet warnings, the whispers nobody else takes seriously. They're usually closer to the truth than the loudest speeches." Ethan's voice returned to her, haunting and small. "They said your name. Tomorrow she signs. She loses everything." Her chest tightened, the weight of years of blind trust in Vincent and Laura pressing against her ribs. What if she had been blind all along? David gathered his tools, slinging the bag over his shoulder. "Elevator's safe now," he said. "You won't have trouble tomorrow." He turned to leave. "Hart," she called, her voice catching him mid-step. He stopped, looking back. "You're not what you seem," she said. A faint smile tugged at his mouth, weary but true. "Neither are you." His footsteps faded into the building's hum, leaving her alone with the storm outside and the storm within. For the first time in years, Victoria Lane felt something no contract or logic could outmaneuver. The dawning certainty that a janitor and his son might hold the key to saving her empire. It wasn't just suspicion, nor merely fear. It was a bone-deep certainty that David Hart, the janitor who once tamed live wires, might be the only soul in this gleaming tower who truly saw the storm gathering on the horizon. In the after-hours hush of the Sterling Ventures lobby, Ethan's whisper cut through the silence like a trembling beacon. "They're doing it again," he murmured, standing between Victoria Lane and his father, a small compass needle quivering toward danger, his hand clutching David's sleeve like a lifeline. Rain-silvered Chicago streets glowed beyond the glass walls, the building humming with the quiet pulse of machines left to their own rhythm. Victoria's first instinct was to dismiss him, to say, "It's late, Ethan. You imagined it." But the boy's eyes held a fear too sharp, too real to be a child's fancy. David said nothing, his silence a steady anchor. He nodded once, a wordless signal. "Lead the way." Ethan tugged them down the service corridor, past the freight elevator, into the shadowed spine of the 35th floor, where the air carried the faint scent of dust and paper, a world unseen by the empire above. Ethan moved with the quiet precision of a boy who had learned to find safety in the unnoticed corners of the world. They stopped at a narrow alcove behind the executive conference room, where a section of the acoustic wall panel stood slightly ajar, a secret door to hidden truths. Ethan pressed a finger to his lips, his whisper barely audible. "Here, you can hear everything." From the other side came the scrape of a chair, the clink of glass on wood, and Vincent Gray's baritone, smooth as oil, dripping with certainty. "She'll walk in at 2, the signature packets ready, yellow tabs where we need them, board consents pre-drafted. The joinder to the new holding entity is buried in Exhibit G. She won't read that far." Laura Bennett's voice answered, her consonants sharp, efficient, cutting like a blade. "The management continuity clause flips control the moment she signs. We file the proxy triggers, and by close of business, the voting rights are ours." Victoria's chest tightened. The legal terms she knew so well now twisted into razors slicing at her empire. Vincent chuckled, his certainty a venomous thread. "You've spoon-fed her efficiency for years, Laura. Tomorrow's the payoff. She'll thank us for saving her time while she hands us the keys." Silence fell on their side of the panel, save for the 3 breaths, CEO, janitor, child, held taut like a single cord in the dark. David shifted, placing himself between Victoria and the crack of light, a quiet instinct to shield her, though she felt it more than saw it. Laura's voice dropped, colder now. "And the side letter in my briefcase," Vincent added, "it pushes the earn-out to milestones she'll never hit once we restructure. If she hesitates, we tell her the Singapore investors expect decisiveness. We make indecision look like incompetence." A pulse of heat surged in Victoria's chest, anger crowding out fear. Her hand reached for the panel, rage urging her to kick the door in, to confront the betrayal head-on. But David's hand found her wrist, gentle yet grounding, his whisper a steady command. "Not here. Let them keep talking. Let them hang themselves." On the other side, a page turned, and Laura's voice sharpened with contempt. "Do you ever wonder if she suspects?" Vincent's reply came with a smile you could hear, smug and assured. "Victoria Lane suspects everything, except the people closest to her. That's her flaw. Trust dressed as leadership, comfortable blindness. We've curated it for 15 years. Victoria closed her eyes, the words not wounding but confirming, each one a mirror to her own oversights. Every rubber-stamped memo, every late-night reassurance, every time she'd chosen speed over scrutiny. It wasn't stupidity, it was fatigue, loneliness wielded like a pen. David leaned closer, his breath a low threat at her ear. "You're not blind," he whispered. "You're outnumbered. That's different." Footsteps paced the conference room, ice shifting in a glass. "Tomorrow at 1:45, Vincent continued, "I walk her through the high points. She signs the consent, the joinder, the proxy. Laura countersigns. Legal files the Delaware filings electronically. Before she finishes her victory speech, Control's already ours. A pause, then Laura's voice, abrupt and cold. And the kid? Security mentioned a child on the 35th last week. I don't like variables. David went still, every muscle wired with a father's protective instinct. Victoria glanced at Ethan, who shrank slightly into his father's side but held his ground, his eyes meeting David's with unshakable trust. Dad will handle this. Vincent snorted, dismissive. A rumor. A janitor's kid playing hide and seek. We run a global company, Laura. We don't lose sleep over ghosts. Laura's voice dropped, a mutter laced with unease. Ghosts hear everything. I want the hallway cleared tomorrow. No staff lingering. Done, Vincent replied. Chairs slid, papers shuffled into a folder, the meeting drawing to a close. David touched Victoria's shoulder, a silent signal to move or risk discovery. He guided them back, their steps soft, breaths measured, turning corners until the voices faded into the building's hum. In the service stairwell, Victoria gripped the cool metal rail, steadying herself as the truth settled like stone in her chest. I heard it, she said, half to herself, half to the man and boy who had led her to this moment. I heard it myself. Ethan looked up, guilt flickering across his small face. I wasn't trying to spy, he said quickly. When I get scared at school, I hide and listen, so I know when it's safe to come out. Victoria crouched, meeting him eye to eye, her boardroom armor giving way to a gentleness she hadn't known she possessed. You weren't spying, she said softly, her voice steady but warm. You were brave. You warned me when no one else would. Ethan's shoulders relaxed, the weight of his fear easing. David exhaled, a trace of the steel leaving his frame. Victoria stood, facing him fully, her gaze resolute. You were right. The quiet warnings are the ones to follow. She glanced back toward the invisible room where her future had been bartered over ice. What do I do now? David didn't rush, his eyes searching her face, weighing her fear against her resolve. His voice was calm, the kind that could coax life from broken circuits. You let them believe tomorrow is theirs. You smile, you sign nothing. And while they rehearse their victory, you gather proof that doesn't blink. Proof, she repeated, the word a lifeline. Recordings, transfers, the side letter. And chain of custody, David added. Law, not drama, a clean trail. People like them count on you exploding in anger. Don't. Make it boring. Paper beats performance. A breath escaped her, almost a laugh, fragile but real. Paper beats performance, she echoed. You sound like someone who's done more than mop floors. I've rebuilt systems that failed under pressure, David said, his voice steady as ever. Different tools, same principle. A long moment hung between them, charged with unspoken alliance. Then Victoria nodded, resolve hardening like concrete. Help me, she said, the words surprising her but carrying no fear. Not because you owe me, because you know how to hold a line. David's answer was unwavering. Yes. Ethan perked up, his face brightening with sparks of relief. I can help too, he chirped, then quickly added, not the dangerous parts. Victoria's gaze softened, a rare warmth breaking through. Then you'll be our cartographer, she said, and we'll do this right. Right is slow, David warned, his voice gentle but firm. And careful. I can do careful, Victoria replied. I've done careful my whole life. I just forgot to aim it inward. They climbed the stairwell together, a CEO, a janitor, and an 8-year-old with a pencil. 3 unlikely allies bound by a shared truth. At the landing, Victoria paused, glancing back into the dim shaft. The building hummed like a sleeping beast, its wires and circuits waiting to carry whatever current they were given, clean power or a fatal surge. She turned forward, her voice steady. Tomorrow they'll think they're leading me to the pen. Let them. I'll be carrying the light. David's mouth curved, not quite a smile but a promise. Then we'll make sure the light doesn't flicker. Ethan squeezed their hands, his small fingers a bridge between their strengths. Dad? He asked softly. Are we safe? David's voice was a quiet vow. We're smarter. Smarter is safer than safe. Victoria drew a breath, deep and grounding, the fear still coiled within her, but now threaded with clarity. They stepped onto the quiet floor, where somewhere Vincent and Laura arranged their props, a briefcase holding a side letter that waited to cut. But in the walls between, a thin seam of truth had opened, just wide enough for three to slip through and rewrite the ending. For the first time since she'd learned to keep her face from cracking, Victoria allowed herself a silent vow. I will not surrender my life to those who mistake my restraint for weakness. The night held its breath, and the building listened. In the janitor's break room, a cramped space of four walls, a humming soda machine, and a scarred table etched with decades of spilled coffee, the air felt charged, like a war room before a battle. Victoria sat rigid in a metal chair, her blazer folded across her lap as if order could hold her fracturing world together. David leaned against the counter, arms crossed, the fluorescent light catching the faint silver at his temples, a testament to years of quiet endurance. Between them, Ethan sat, his small legs swinging above the floor, clutching his sketchbook like a shield against the storm they'd uncovered. Silence pressed down, heavy with the betrayal laid bare hours earlier. Victoria's breath came in shallow, uneven pulls, her composure fraying at the edges. Finally, her voice broke the stillness, raw and low. I swore it would never happen again. David's gaze lifted, steady and searching. What would never happen again? She hesitated, revealing weakness like standing on the edge of a cliff, the abyss of her past yawning below. But Vincent's smug voice, the clink of his glass, pushed her forward. She pressed her palms flat against the table, knuckles pale. When I was 21, she began, her voice a low tremor, my father sold my family's company, not to protect us, not to save it. He sold it because it was easy, because money spoke louder than loyalty. I watched him sign away everything my mother built. Do you know what it's like to realize the person you trusted most could trade you like a stock option? The words landed hard, jagged and raw, each one a shard of a wound she'd buried deep. David uncrossed his arms, his face softening but offering no platitudes, only truth. I know what it's like to lose trust, he said, his voice steady but heavy with memory. One morning, my wife kissed me goodbye. That night I stood in a hospital corridor, staring at a chart that said she wasn't coming home. Sometimes trust isn't broken by betrayal, it's stolen, and you never get the chance to fight for it. Victoria Lane's sharpness wavered, her polished armor cracking under the weight of David Hart's words. For the first time, she saw not just a janitor in a faded uniform, but a man sculpted by a loss as raw and jagged as her own. Ethan shifted, his small fingers tapping nervously against his sketchbook, his eyes darting between the two adults, searching for a path forward. So what do we do now? He asked, his voice a child's plea for clarity in a world of shadows. Victoria almost laughed at the simplicity, the sound catching in her throat like a fragile breath. What we do, she said, forcing air through the tightness in her chest, is act like nothing's wrong. If I confront Vincent without proof, he'll bury me. David pushed away from the counter, his voice steady as a heartbeat in the storm. Then don't confront him. Not yet. Let them think you're still blind. Let them feel safe enough to brag. Her head snapped toward him, eyes narrowing, but his gaze held firm. Play weak, play smart, he corrected, stepping closer, his presence a quiet anchor. Strike now, and the evidence vanishes. Wait, and they'll expose themselves. Before she could respond, Ethan leaned forward, words tumbling out like stones skipping across water. I can help. Both adults turned, startled, their eyes locking on the boy. They don't notice me, he continued, his voice quick and earnest. When kids at school push me around, I learn to disappear, hide in lockers, crawl under stairs, stay so still they forget I exist. He tapped his sketchbook, its pages filled with a child's map of vents and hallways, lines messy but startlingly precise. If you need someone to listen, I can do it. I already did. Victoria's chest tightened, Ethan's courage a blade cutting through her defenses. Ethan, she began, but David crouched beside his son, gently taking the sketchbook. He studied the chaotic lines, now seeing their purpose, maps of unseen places, taped to the fridge at home, their meaning dawning only now. His voice was calm but edged with steel. You've helped enough. This isn't your fight. Ethan's eyes dropped, his small frame deflating. "I just don't want them to win," he said softly, the words slicing deeper than any boardroom betrayal. Victoria leaned forward, her tone gentler than she'd ever allowed. "David, he's right. They don't see him. That makes him safer than either of us." David's jaw clenched, his fist curling with a father's fear. "Safer? If they realize a child overheard them—" He broke off, his voice thick with dread. Ethan's small voice cut through the silence, resolute. "I can do it. I want to." The air grew heavy, the weight of his bravery pressing against them. Victoria closed her eyes, Vincent's oily promises and Laura's cruel laugh echoing in her mind. When she opened them, steel glinted in her gaze. "They won't win. Not this time." Her hand moved across the table, not touching David's, but close enough to carry the weight of their alliance. "We stand together. If they think I'm weak, let them. If they think you're invisible, Ethan, let them. And David, if they think you're just the janitor, let them laugh, until they realize they underestimated the wrong people." David studied her, seeing the fire of determination in her eyes, tempered by the shadow of a young woman betrayed by her father, desperate never to be blind again. He nodded slowly. "All right. But one rule. Ethan's safety comes first. If it's evidence or him, we walk away." "Understood," Victoria whispered, her voice steady despite the storm within. Ethan, sensing a small victory, scribbled furiously in his sketchbook, his pencil a quiet rebellion. "Then we need a plan," he said. David ruffled his hair, his hand lingering protectively. "Careful, champ. Planning's easy. Surviving's the hard part." For the first time that night, Victoria's lips curved into a faint smile, fragile but real. "Then let's make sure we do both." The soda machine hummed louder, a mechanical heartbeat in the dingy break room, where an unlikely trio, CEO, janitor, and boy, sat bound not by contracts or blood, but by necessity and a shared vow. Beyond the thin walls, Vincent and Laura plotted, certain of their victory, unaware that in the shadows a fragile, imperfect, dangerous alliance had been forged, stronger than they could ever imagine. By noon, the Sterling Ventures building held the hush of a cathedral before a verdict. Victoria crossed the 35th floor with the precision of a surgeon, each step measured, her pulse a rapid drumbeat she refused to betray. Vincent Gray waited in the private lounge, a glass box cantilevered over Chicago's skyline, espresso steaming, his smile polished to a mirror's sheen. Laura Bennett stood at the window, her reflection a crimson slash against the city's sprawl. "Victoria," Vincent purred, rising, the clink of porcelain on saucer ringing like a tiny bell. "You look exhausted. Leadership does that. It steals sleep and pays it back in legacy." She set her briefcase down, her movements deliberate. "Legacy can wait. Clarity can't." His smile didn't waver as he slid a slim folder across the table. "Talking points for tomorrow. High level only. Investors love brevity." His knuckle tapped the cover, soft but deliberate. "And if I may, your greatest asset has always been trust." Her eyes lifted, sharp and searching. "Trust in what?" "In me," he said smoothly. "In us. You don't need to drown in paper to make the right decision." His smile widened, a confession masked as praise. "Your trust, Victoria, is my greatest asset." A spoon chimed against porcelain, and Laura's low, practiced laugh followed. "We'll keep you above the weeds," she added. "The signature packet is color-tabbed. Yellow where you sign, blue where I initial, green for counsel. You'll be done in 5 minutes, 10 if the translators drag." Victoria skimmed the first page, the verbs leaping out: sign, delegate, appoint, like shadows moving beneath dark water, pulling her toward a place she didn't want to go. She closed the folder and met Vincent's eyes. 5 minutes, she said flatly. "It's mercy," he replied, his voice a velvet trap. She let the silence linger, long enough to read his confidence, short enough to feed it. Then she slipped the folder into her briefcase. "Tomorrow I'll rely on you." Vincent's smile flashed. "As always." They toasted with water, crystal tapping crystal, the sound bleeding into the room like a hairline crack through glass. In the hallway, Victoria's pulse hammered against her throat as she passed the boardroom. Its polished stage set for tomorrow's betrayal. The carpet yielded under her heels, as if the floor itself waited for the drama to unfold. A security guard, Jack Turner, rolled a cart of bottled water to the credenza. He looked up. "Morning, Ms. Lane." "Morning, Jack," she replied, her voice steady. He hesitated. "Facilities note says the 35th's clear tomorrow. No staff lingering. VIP privacy order." Her mouth dried, a chill creeping up her spine. "From whom?" "CFO's office. 9 o'clock sharp." She nodded once and walked on, the corner swallowing them both. She found David in the mechanical mezzanine, a low-ceilinged artery where ducts and cables pulsed like sleeping beasts. He was crouched at a junction box, voltage pen in hand, his focus unwavering. She waited until he set the tool down. "They're clearing the floor tomorrow," she said. "No staff. Someone doesn't want witnesses." He studied her face, his eyes searching. "How close did he stand to you?" "Close enough to call my trust his greatest asset." The corner of David's mouth tugged, not a smile but a spark of recognition. "Then he's already told you his weakness." The words struck clean, piercing the armor she'd worn for years. She gripped the rail, her breath hitching as truth settled in her chest like a long-buried guest. "I built all this," she whispered, "and I let them build a door I can't see." A single tear slid free before she could stop it, her vow never to break in front of anyone, crumbling under the weight of her own blindness. David didn't reach for her or offer empty promises. He set his tool bag between them, its weight grounding the air. "Trust is fragile," he said. "Let's make sure they break theirs, not yours." She gave a brittle laugh, the sound raw but real. "How?" "Boring," he said, his voice steady. "Relentlessly boring. Paper, timestamps. People get flashy when they steal. We stay dull." "Walk me through dull," she said, her voice steadier now. "You've got authority to issue an internal audit, routine, quarterly compliance. Pull print logs from the executive wing, badge swipes for finance and legal, shred manifests for the last 30 days. Lock email threads with keywords, proxy, joinder, continuity, side letter." "They'll panic," she said. "They'll relax," he countered. "Audits are white noise to people who think they're smarter than the system. While they relax, we watch where their eyes jump." She steadied, resolve hardening. "And the side letter? It's not in shared drives, not in minutes. It's in a briefcase or personal cloud," he said, his knuckle tapping the bag. "They have to carry it into the room. Confidence makes them sloppy. That's our window." She studied him, seeing not just a janitor but a man who had pulled lives from live wires. "You sound like someone who's saved a company before." "I've pulled men off live wires," he said simply. "Principle's the same." She drew herself straighter. "I'll issue the audit, quietly, and I'll send Vincent a message that sounds like surrender." "Good," David said. "Let him believe a story you've stopped believing." In her office, she typed with fingers that trembled only once. "Vincent, appreciate you and Laura carrying the weight. I'll rely on your guidance tomorrow and keep remarks short. Please have the tabs ready." His reply came in under a minute. "Knew we could count on you. Big day ahead." She opened a note to compliance. "Initiate Q2 audit. Pull print logs, executive wing badge swipes, finance, legal shred manifests, 30 days. Keyword retention, proxy, joinder, continuity, side letter. Routine schedule, no broadcast." She hit send, the city staring back through the glass. Distant, indifferent, honest. Late afternoon, the trap arrived, cloaked as courtesy. Laura appeared uninvited. Latte in one hand, a gift box in the other. "You'll want a good pen for tomorrow," she said, clicking the lid open to reveal a black lacquer pen. Fine-pointed, elegant, deadly. Victoria turned it in her fingers, her voice cool. "Do you always give gifts that double as instructions?" "I give gifts that ease pressure," Laura replied, her smile smooth as silk. "We've all sacrificed for this company. Let tomorrow be easy." Victoria met her gaze, unflinching. "Easy? That's mercy, isn't it?" "Mercy," Laura echoed, leaving a faint perfume and a sharper threat behind. Victoria set the pen down, a trap unsprung. Evening deepened, and at the lobby turnstiles, Jack lowered his voice as David passed with a mop bucket. "Heads up, Hart. Tomorrow the 35th's a ghost town. Orders are orders, but keep the kid away." David's grip tightened, a knot forming in his chest, one he hadn't felt since the hospital years ago. "He won't be here," he said, his voice flat. "Good," Jack replied. "Wrong day to be curious." David walked on, jaw locked, picturing Ethan's earnest face. Victoria at the long table, the gift pen glinting like a blade. He let the knot stay. It kept him sharp. They met once more in the service stairwell, the building's quiet spine. Victoria stood 2 steps above, but their eyes met level. "I told him I'd rely on him," she said. "That was the right lie," David answered. "I issued the audit. That was the right truth." Her breath trembled, vulnerability seeping through. "And if they see through me?" "They won't," he said, his voice steady as stone. "People drunk on their own cleverness don't see through anything. They only see mirrors." Her lips curved, tired but real, a spark of hope breaking through. "You sound like a man who used to lead a team." "I did," he said, his voice softening. "One person. She was 6. We built blanket forts and convinced each other monsters were cowards." "How'd you manage that?" she asked, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "We stayed together." They stood in the hum, no longer strangers since that first whisper in the elevator. Above, the boardroom slept in polished shadows. Below, the lobby gleamed like a stage. Between them, the net drew tighter, certain of its catch. Victoria straightened, her hand brushing the rail. "Tomorrow, I act small." "Tomorrow," David said, hefting his bag, "you act precise. And when they lean close to claim what isn't theirs, we let the wire bite." David Hart's words hung in the air, a quiet vow as sharp as a blade. They parted without ceremony, the hum of Sterling Ventures Tower swallowing their steps. Somewhere, glasses clinked in a polished boardroom. Somewhere, a folder snapped shut with the weight of betrayal. And somewhere, in a small Chicago apartment, a boy hunched over a kitchen table, darkening a penciled map with fierce concentration. Ethan Hart drew 2 dots close together, scrawling "safe" above them in crooked letters, his small hand trembling with hope. The night closed its fist around the glass tower, but morning would pry it open, relentless and unforgiving. A memo landed like a cold front, silent and absolute, stripping the 35th floor bare of assistants' carts and casual chatter within an hour. Chrome signs by the elevators declared Level 35, restricted 12:03 p.m., executive session. The words as unyielding as the steel doors that now refused to yield to badge swipes. In the lobby below, David read the notice twice, a knot tightening beneath his sternum, heavy as the grief he'd carried since his wife's passing. He had told the security guard, Jack Turner, the night before, "Ethan won't be here." He'd promised himself the same. Promises were easy when the world behaved, but by late morning, his phone delivered a delayed voicemail, its words slicing through his resolve. "School dismissed early. Buses delayed. Ethan's with Mrs. Walsh. She can drop him by." By the time David lifted his head from the mop sink, his boy was already pushing through the revolving doors, cheeks pink from the Chicago wind, a breathless smile lighting his face, and a folded drawing clutched like a treasure. "Dad!" Ethan's voice rang under the lobby's high ceiling, brimming with that unbreakable, dangerous trust that made David's heart stutter. "Ethan, no," he said, flicking a glance at Jack at the security desk before crouching low. "Buddy, today isn't the day." Ethan lifted the paper, a maze with 3 dots marked V, D, E, and the word "together" scrawled beneath. "I brought you something." "I'll hang it at home," David said, swallowing the ache in his chest. "But you can't go upstairs. Not today." A chime sounded, and the elevator doors slid open. Laura Bennett stepped out, flanked by 2 aides, her strides cutting through the lobby like a blade. Crimson nails clipping a sharp rhythm, her eyes never glancing their way. "Dad," Ethan whispered, suddenly hushed. "I'll stay by the vending machines. I won't move." David stared at his son, torn between fear and faith, years of hard lessons echoing in his mind. Fear should make you careful, not cruel. He touched Ethan's shoulder, his voice firm but tender. "Don't move, not an inch. Understand?" "I'll be invisible," Ethan promised, and David hated how well his son knew how to disappear. At 12:17, a courier rolled in with a battered crate of bottled water for the executive floor. David signed automatically, habit overtaking thought, until a flustered assistant rushed over. "That's supposed to be upstairs by 12:30, she said, her voice sharp with urgency. Jack raised both palms. "Restricted, ma'am." Her eyes locked on David. "You. Now." He almost said no, the word rising like bile, but refusal would draw questions. Or worse, send someone else into the danger he sensed brewing. He squeezed Ethan's shoulder. "Stay put." Then he hefted the crate and stepped into the waiting elevator, the doors closing like a predator's jaws. The 35th floor server corridor was colder, humming with the mechanical breath of Sterling Ventures' hidden heart. The data room door, gray steel, red badge reader, loomed like a guarded vault, its silence heavy with secrets. Ethan hadn't meant to disobey. He sat by the vending machines, trying to be invisible, but watching his father bend under the crate's weight, the elevator swallowing him whole, something inside him rebelled. A spark of courage too fierce for his small frame. When Jack turned to take a call, Ethan slipped into the stream of suits, their badges blinking green, his slight figure vanishing between briefcases. By 12:28, the boy who had promised stillness stood alone in a place no child belonged. Footsteps echoed, brisk, decisive heels. Ethan ducked instinctively, crawling under a rolling ladder parked near the data room, his palms pressed flat to still their tremor. From the floor, shoes became characters. Polished Oxfords, steel gray pumps, the heavy boots of guards. The Oxfords stopped at the badge reader. A beep, a click, and the lock yielded. Vincent Gray's voice floated out, slick and bright. 15 minutes. We staged the packets in here, not the boardroom. Fewer eyes." A guard muttered something low, then Laura's voice cut through, sharp as glass. "I want no one wandering. We've had enough surprises this week." She pivoted, her heels scraping closer, her gaze snagging on a flicker of movement in the glass reflection. Too low, too small. She froze. "Problem?" Vincent asked, his tone casual but edged. Laura didn't answer, taking one step toward the ladder. Ethan held his breath, his chest burning, fear coiling tight. A door banged down the corridor. "Delivery for conference," David called, his voice steady by sheer will. Laura's head snapped toward the sound. "Leave it at the credenza," she ordered coolly, "and clear this hallway." David's eyes swept once, catching the edge of small sneakers beneath the ladder, lightning surging through his veins. He didn't look again, carrying the crate with the calm of a man walking through fire, as if the world were ordinary. Around the bend, he set the crate down and ducked into a copy alcove, phone to his ear in pantomime, masking the rescuer waking within. The man who had once pulled colleagues from live wires and flames. He counted seconds, then circled back through a service passage. The ladder sat untouched. Dropping to one knee, David reached into the shadows, finding Ethan's trembling wrist and pulling him free. "Don't talk," he whispered, his voice a lifeline. Together they moved as one shadow, Vincent's voice swelling behind them, cruel and certain. "By the time she thanks us for our stewardship, she'll have nothing left." Laughter followed, cold and sharp. David's jaw clenched, his body shielding Ethan as they pressed forward. The elevator bank loomed, doors sliding open to reveal Laura Bennett, alone, folder in hand. She stopped, her eyes catching them like prey, the paws stretching taut, her mouth curved, not a smile but a calculation. "Mr. Hart," she said, her voice warm with false sweetness. "Busy day, isn't it?" Her gaze flicked to Ethan, chilling in its precision. "And who's this?" "My son," David replied, flat and steady. "He got turned around looking for the lobby. We're leaving." Laura tilted her head, her voice softening to a dangerous lilt. "You know, our insurance team hates surprises, especially little ones. Sometimes children have accidents when parents aren't careful." Ethan's hand crushed David's, fear flickering in his eyes. David met Laura's gaze, unflinching. "Then this parent will be careful, starting now." He brushed past, his shoulder a barrier between her and his son. Laura didn't move, letting them pass, her hollow smile lingering like a threat. In the elevator, David pressed lobby with a finger that didn't shake, the doors sealing her out. Only then did he breathe, his voice soft but firm. You okay? I'm sorry, Ethan whispered, his voice small but heavy with guilt. I just wanted to make sure you weren't alone. David's chest tightened, love and fear warring within. Being brave doesn't always mean stepping closer, he said. Sometimes it means staying where someone can protect you. The elevator chimed, the lobby opening before them. David guided Ethan out, his body a shield against every line of sight, his heart carrying the weight of a father who knew the cost of courage. Jack Turner's worried glance met David Hart's, but no questions followed, the silence heavy with unspoken understanding. David nodded, a curt later, and steered Ethan into a side corridor, away from the lobby's prying eyes. Victoria Lane waited there, drawn as if by the gravity of their shared need, her presence a quiet beacon in the dimness. One look at David's taut face, and she reached for Ethan, not to claim, but to steady, her hand gentle on his shoulder. Are you hurt? She asked, her voice soft but urgent. Ethan shook his head, his eyes downcast. I messed up, he whispered, guilt threading through his small voice. Victoria crouched, meeting his gaze, her boardroom armor softening. You tried to help, she said, her tone warm with a tenderness she rarely allowed. Now help me by letting your dad keep you safe. Ethan nodded, biting his lip, and pressed his folded drawing into her hands. This was for him, he said, but maybe it's for you too. She unfolded it, a maze with 3 dots labeled VDE, the word together scrawled beneath in a child's uneven hand. Something in Victoria's defenses cracked, a fracture that didn't break her, but let light through. She lifted her eyes to David. What did she say? David's jaw flexed, his voice low and edged with steel. That accidents happen to kids when parents aren't careful. Victoria's eyes turned cold, not cruel but resolved, a fire kindling behind her gaze. Then let's make this the safest building a child has ever stood in. David searched her face for any tremor of doubt, finding none, only steel tempered by a promise forged in shared purpose. I'll call in a friend, he said, his voice steady as the circuits he once mastered. Someone who can document without being seen. If we set this right, Ethan never has to be near it again. Victoria slipped the drawing into her portfolio, treating it like a sacred relic. Do it, she said, then paused, her voice softening. And David, thank you. For what? He asked, his brow furrowing. For not exploding. Not exploding keeps people alive, he said, glancing at Ethan, his eyes carrying a father's fierce love. Starting with you. Starting with me, Ethan echoed, his small voice a spark of resilience. They moved as a unit toward the side exit, stepping into Chicago's ordinary hum. Cars, distant horns, the city's restless pulse. Above them, Laura Bennett believed she had measured every risk, blind to the unbreakable line of a father's devotion. On the sidewalk, David knelt to Ethan's level, his voice soft but firm. Home, homework, pizza. Your job is to forget this floor exists until I say otherwise. Ethan blinked, his eyes wide with trust. What about your job? David glanced at Victoria, a quiet vow in his gaze. My job is to teach the monsters we don't scare. Victoria's phone buzzed, another trap disguised as a meeting. She silenced it, the drawing rustling in her bag like a stubborn truth. Tomorrow, she murmured, her voice low but resolute, we stop pretending we owe them anything. David nodded, his eyes steady. Tomorrow we make the wire bite. Father and son turned toward the subway, Victoria toward the tower, the city exhaling around them. The danger had shown its face, but it had given them something stronger than fear, a plan, a boundary, a promise carved into the quiet. The corner cafe on a quiet Chicago street smelled of burnt coffee and second chances, its neon glow tinting the linoleum in a weary pink. David sat in a corner booth, back to the wall, eyes fixed on the door like a man who knew the cost of letting his guard down. Victoria slid into the seat across from him, her stillness a mask of power honed through years of commanding boardrooms. Between them, an empty sugar caddy sat like neutral ground, a silent witness to their fragile alliance. The bell above the door jingled, and Michael Stone entered, a man in his mid-40s, sleeves rolled, moving with the quiet economy of a former cop who'd traded his badge for a private investigator's license. and clients who valued truth over applause. He scanned the room once, then strode to their booth, his battered messenger bag slung over his shoulder. "You look the same," David said, a faint warmth breaking through his guarded tone. "Only in bad lighting," Michael replied, a wry curve to his mouth as he set the bag down. His eyes shifted to Victoria, assessing her with the precision of a man who'd heard too many lies to be fooled. "You must be the woman who forgot how to be afraid." Victoria didn't blink, her gaze steady. "I didn't forget," she said. "I just ran out of time." Michael's mouth twitched, a flicker of respect. He slid a black case across the table and opened it, revealing a body recorder no larger than a car key, a pen that was more than it seemed, and 2 coin-sized buttons. "Ground rules," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "We record lawfully or we don't record at all. Illinois is a one-party consent state. If you're in the conversation and you agree, the audio's clean. For video, the boardroom's your property, so hidden cameras are fine with owner authorization. No expectation of privacy in a corporate meeting." He looked squarely at Victoria. "I'll need your written authorization." "Clear," she said, her voice unshaken. Michael continued, his tone clipped and professional. "No scripts. We're not cops, so entrapment doesn't apply. But juries hate performances. Don't bait, don't lead. Ask the questions you'd normally ask. Summarize the side letter, walk me through execution, let them brag. Timestamps beat charm. Chain of custody beats charisma." Victoria's voice was steady, a blade wrapped in silk. "We launched an internal audit yesterday. Badge logs, shred manifests, keyword holds on proxy, joinder, continuity, side letters. It'll look routine." "That was smart," Michael said, a nod of approval. "The audit builds a paper spine. These," he gestured to the devices, "give it nerves." He pushed the recorder toward her. "Clips inside your jacket. 1 click to start, 1 to stop. The pen's back up. The buttons are cameras, 1 in the smoke detector, 1 in the AV closet." David frowned, his voice low. "What if they clear the floor?" "I saw the memo," Michael said. "Victoria authorizes an AV test today. I'll go in with a vendor badge from a contractor I consult for. We place the gear after hours." He turned to David. "You and I sync clocks to NIST time and seal evidence bags on site. Boring is what survives court." The waitress poured coffee, 3 mugs steaming between them, the scent grounding the tension. Victoria wrapped her hands around the heat, her voice steady as Michael lowered his. "Once we have what we need, I'll take it straight to the U.S. Attorney's Office and a bureau contact who still owes me. They don't kick down doors for allegations. They move on audio, video, and a paper trail they can defend." Victoria nodded, her resolve unshakable. "Then we give them all 3. At 3:40 p.m., Tuana, an AV tech with a contractor badge, Michael in disguise, rolled a cart into the executive boardroom, a Pelican case hidden beneath its surface. Victoria stood by the window, Chicago's skyline glowing under the late afternoon sun, a city both ally and witness. "You have my authorization in writing," she said, her voice steady as she handed over the signed document. "Already signed," Michael replied, his hands moving with practiced precision. He pulled down the smoke sensor cover, placing a button camera with care, snapping it back into place. "Wide angle, no distortion. It catches the table, not the ceiling." In the AV closet, he positioned the second camera through the vent grill. "Redundancy isn't paranoia, it's manners." A slim mic slid under Victoria's chair. "Primary audio is your body recorder. This is insurance." He turned to David. "Time synced." David confirmed, his voice steady. 3:41 and 2 seconds. Michael's plan was meticulous, a blueprint for truth in a world of deception. And as they worked, the boardroom held its breath, waiting for the moment the wire would bite. 58 seconds past the hour, Michael Stone announced, clicking a slate with the precision of a man who lived by unyielding truths. "Device A on at 15:41:02, device B at 15:41:06. Victoria Lane clipped the body recorder inside her blazer, her fingers steady despite the storm in her chest. She pressed the button, a faint buzz humming to life. "Testing," she said, her voice clear and commanding. "This is Victoria Lane. authorizing audio and video recording in the Sterling Ventures boardroom for security and archival purposes. Michael nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. Perfect. You sound like a CEO. A faint smile tugged at her lips, fleeting but resolute. I am. When they finished, the boardroom stood untouched, its sleek surfaces indifferent, waiting for the drama to unfold. Tomorrow, Michael said, shouldering his bag, you walk in like always. And when they say the thing they can't help but say, we let the wire bite, David Hart finished, his voice steady as the circuits he once mastered. Michael studied him, a spark of recognition in his gaze. You've changed. David didn't answer, his attention caught by the air, thick with the pulse of a heartbeat not his own. At 5:20 p.m., in a small kitchen across Chicago, Ethan sat at a worn table, a workbook open, pizza rolls cooling like tiny moons. He watched his father pack a canvas pouch, Faraday bag, tamper seals, custody log, each movement deliberate, a ritual of protection. Do I get a job? Ethan asked, his voice small but eager. David slid him a flyer, circling the time. After school tutoring, Mrs. Walsh, 4 to 6 p.m. Your job is to be exactly there, not upstairs, not late. Ethan pouted, his eyes bright with defiance. But I know the quiet places. I know where vents carry sound. David tapped the boys' hand-drawn maps, their lines a testament to his son's unseen courage. You already told me. That's enough. Being brave doesn't always mean being close. Ethan's voice dropped, fear creeping in. What if they hurt you? David's gaze softened, his hand resting on his son's shoulder. They won't. People like that only swing when they think you're tied up. You won't be tied up, not when I've got you to come home to. He smoothed Ethan's hair, his touch a quiet vow. Listen to Mrs. Walsh. Learn something boring and beautiful. Math saves people from bad deals. Ethan scribbled 3 dots in a tiny maze, the word together beneath them, then tore the strip and handed it over. For your pocket. David slipped it behind his license, his voice thick. For my pocket. Dusk cloaked the Sterling Ventures tower like a verdict, its glass walls gleaming under Chicago's fading light. Victoria stood at her office window, the city's pulse a distant hum, when her phone buzzed with Vincent Gray's trap. Investors thrilled for tomorrow. You'll only need 5 minutes. Bring that pen, she typed back, her fingers trembling only in secret. Understood. I'll rely on your guidance. Setting the phone down, she felt the recorder's cool weight in her hand before slipping it into her blazer. A knock sounded, and David stepped in, Michael behind him, their presence filling the room with 2 kinds of steadiness. Grief's tempered steel and the calm of interrogation. Victoria's shoulders eased half an inch. Compliance pinged, she said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. The audit's tugging threads. Badge logs show late-night data room entries. Shred bins spiked last week. Good, Michael said, holding up a clear evidence pouch. Tomorrow we give that paper a voice. When the meeting ends, you walk straight to me. We stop the recorder, seal it, sign the tape. No detours, no victory laps. Victoria nodded. No victory laps. David hesitated at the door, his voice tight. One more thing. If Laura so much as breathes in Ethan's direction, she won't, Victoria cut in. Not as comfort, but as a decision, her eyes fierce with resolve. I'll see to it. David's jaw eased, a flicker of trust passing between them. He turned to Michael. 7:30, AV check. 1:30, we stage the room. 2, they think they win. And 2:105, Michael finished, we change the ending. Night fell, Chicago's lamps flickering to life, a saxophone's mournful wail trading loneliness for sound. Victoria lingered in her office, practicing her question. Not defiance, not accusation, but sharp enough to cut. Before I sign, Vincent, summarize the side letter for the record. She repeated it softer, her voice a scalpel she could wield with precision. Across town, David carried Ethan to bed, pausing in the doorway, the paper maze warm against his thigh, a quiet reminder of his son's courage. Michael sat in his car, writing in block letters. Placed devices, 1541 to 1550, verified power and angles, synced time to NIST, custody, Stone, Lane AM, Lane Stone, PM. He tucked it into the case like a prayer, the city's pulse steady around him. Morning would dawn hard and bright, the Sterling Ventures boardroom smelling of lemon oil and ink. Vincent polishing his smile, Laura laying out the pen like a promise. The directors would nod in all the right places, but at the head of the table, a woman who had learned the cost of trust would ask for a summary, her voice steady, her resolve unbreakable. The cameras would see, the audio would hear, the paper would hold its spine. At 1:59, the clock would click. At 2, wash the doors would open. And at 2:05, if courage held, the truth would turn on. The boardroom was an altar, its mahogany polished to a mirror's shine, high-back leather chairs aligned like silent judges, Chicago's skyline framed in glass, as if the city itself bowed to the power within. But this morning the air was heavier, the walls bracing for rupture. David stood just beyond the double doors, his mop bucket a camouflage, his clean uniform bearing the faint scars of labor. To others he was invisible. To him, every sound from inside was thunder. At the head of the table, Victoria sat poised, her blazer crisp, the faint vibration of the hidden recorder humming against her chest. Across from her, Vincent Gray lounged with a predator's ease, tapping a Mont Blanc pen against a thick stack of contracts, each tap a calculated rhythm. Beside him, Laura Bennett distributed bound packets with surgical precision, her smile a polished blade honed by years of hiding knives and paperwork. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vincent said, his voice smooth as oil, "what you have before you is the cleanest path forward. The continuity agreement ensures stability. The joinder clauses align us. And," he tapped the final page, "the side letter provides flexibility for outside interests." A director frowned, his voice cutting through the room. "Side letter? That wasn't in last week's draft." Laura's smile held firm, unshaken. "Standard housekeeping. We'll summarize for the record." Victoria's pulse hammered, sharp and singular, but she steadied her voice into a scalpel's edge. "Then summarize it now for the record." Vincent blinked, then leaned forward, his smirk widening, savoring the performance. "Of course, transparency." He flipped a page, his movements deliberate. "The side letter allocates discretionary funds routed through a Bermuda fund. Pure liquidity management." Laura's voice slid in, velvet masking steel. "It also keeps strategic partners incentivized. Confidentiality protects shareholder value." "Say the number," Victoria pressed, her gaze unyielding. Vincent's grin glittered, predatory. $200 million. Deferred tax exposure. Everyone wins." The room froze. A cough, a chair shifting, the air taut with unspoken truths. Victoria touched her pocket, the recorder humming alive. $200 million siphoned offshore, she repeated, her voice steady as stone. "And you admit this is your design?" Vincent chuckled, his arrogance unmasked. "Admit? It's brilliance. This is how companies survive. Without it, Sterling Ventures collapses. You should be thanking me." Laura's voice was coaxing, a velvet trap. "The Singapore investors already agreed. You're the last signature. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Victoria's gaze sharpened, cutting through their facade. "Harder for who?" Behind the glass, David's fists clenched, Ethan's drawing pressed against his pocket like a talisman, urging him to storm in, to tear Vincent from his chair. But not yet. At the table, Michael Stone sat quietly, disguised as a compliance consultant, his pen clicking once, discreetly marking the time. Victoria turned a page, her movements deliberate. "This side letter, was it disclosed in the SEC filing?" Vincent's smirk returned, sharper, crueler. "Of course not. Some truths don't belong in sunlight." Laura's tone dripped with condescension. "Victoria, every empire is built on shadows. Yours is no different." Victoria's reply sliced the air, clear and unyielding. "Empires built on shadows collapse. Sterling Ventures deserves better." Vincent's face hardened, his voice a low growl. "Careful. Without us, you're nothing but a figurehead. We carried you after the scandal, buried the whispers. You owe us." "Sayana, I don't owe you silence," she shot back, her voice a bell ringing through the room. A murmur rippled among the directors. A gray-haired veteran, loyal for decades, spoke up. Vincent, 200 million isn't liquidity management, it's fraud. The word landed like a gavel, shattering the room's fragile calm. Laura's composure cracked, her pen tapping too fast. Vincent slammed his palm on the table, his voice rising. You think the DOJ cares about accounting footnotes? We built this machine. We can bury any noise she makes. He jabbed a finger at Victoria, his eyes blazing. She doesn't have the guts. Victoria lifted her chin, her voice steady as bedrock. Courage isn't the problem. Evidence isn't either. Vincent's eyes flicked to her pocket, his smirk brittle now. A toy recorder? Chain of custody? Admissibility? You think this holds up? Michael's voice cut through, calm as stone. Chain of custody is intact. This meeting was authorized. One-party consent jurisdiction. The audio's clean. Video, too. Every head turned, Vincent's smirk shattering, Laura freezing in place. You! Vincent spat, his voice venomous. Who are you? Michael met his stare, unflinching. Someone who remembers what justice sounds like. The boardroom fractured into whispers, Laura scrambling for her phone, Vincent surging to his feet. Victoria remained seated, steady as bedrock, signing not Vincent's packet but the compliance authorization. Michael slid forward, sealing the evidence chain with practiced precision. Vincent's face flushed crimson, his voice a snarl. You think you've won? You don't know who I answer to. You don't know what's coming. Victoria rose, her voice ringing like a bell. I don't need to know. When the truth leaves this room, it doesn't come back. Outside, David exhaled, his chest heaving as he witnessed the moment lies turn brittle, the mask of betrayal cracking. He knew the cost of Victoria's stand and that she hadn't stood alone. Through the glass, their eyes met, a heartbeat of unshakable trust pulsing between them in the midst of war. As security entered, Vincent's shouts echoing down the corridor, David whispered to himself. At 2:05, the truth turned on. The first sound was the crackle of a radio, clipped syllables slicing through the air outside the boardroom. The second was a command, sharp as a blade. Federal agents, nobody move. The double doors swung open, dark windbreakers flooding the room, FBI stamped across their backs, their movements quiet, practiced, efficient. An older agent, gray at his temples, stepped forward, palm raised. Vincent Gray, Laura Bennett, hands where I can see them. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering, the agent declared, his voice cutting through the boardroom like a blade. We have a signed warrant, asset freeze orders, and preservation notices for all systems. Stand. The unmistakable sound of metal kissing metal followed. Click, click, as handcuffs snapped shut. The room inhaled as one, a collective gasp frozen in the air. Laura Bennett's voice broke, sharp and desperate. You can't. This is a misunderstanding. We were protecting shareholder value. The agent, gray at his temples, didn't glance her way. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. Across the table, Victoria Lane sat still as stone, her hand resting over the recorder hidden in her blazer, its faint hum a silent ally. She didn't smile or flinch. When Vincent Gray's eyes met hers, she saw arrogance crumble, his gaze betraying the mortal fear of a man who had overestimated his invincibility. You did this, he hissed, venom lacing his voice. Victoria's reply was even, unyielding. I told the truth. It walked here on its own. Michael Stone stood, shedding his quiet consultant's disguise like a cloak. From his bag, he produced a sealed evidence pouch, his voice calm and professional. Chain of custody begins now. Primary audio from Ms. Lane, secondary audio under her chair, 2 cameras, ceiling sensor and AV vent, all time-synced. My authorization letters and placement log are inside. The agent checked the seals, nodding with approval. Thank you for keeping this clean. He gestured to his team. Photograph everything, bag all devices, laptops, the red briefcase by Mr. Gray, everything logged. A director whispered, voice trembling. Agent, what happens to the company today? The agent's reply was steady. It keeps breathing. Our orders freeze the money and preserve the records. Your job is to cooperate. Vincent lurched to his feet, cuffs biting his wrists, his voice a snarl. You think you've won? You don't know who I answer to. Victoria rose, her voice clear as a bell. No, but now they know me. As agents led Vincent and Laura out, David Hart waited in the corridor, his presence a quiet sentinel. He didn't gloat, his relief softening the tension in his shoulders like a long-held breath released. As Laura passed, her sideways glance carried the ghost of her earlier threat, a thin smile curling her lips. David spoke, his voice clear enough for the hall to hear. You said kids have accidents when parents aren't careful. For the first time, something flickered across her face, shame or perhaps calculation, and she looked away, her composure fracturing. Inside the boardroom, agents cataloged evidence with meticulous care, Michael initialing seals with the precision of a man who knew the weight of truth. Victoria exhaled, a small tremor shaking loose from her chest, the weight of the moment settling. David stepped forward, as if finally invited into the space she'd held alone. You held, he said, his voice low but warm. She nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Only because you taught me how to be boring. A laugh slipped from him, rough and real. Boring wins court. Boring saved a company. Truth did that, she corrected, her voice steady. Boring just carried it. Agent Thomas Reed, the kind-eyed one, approached. Ms. Lane, we'll need your statement at the field office this afternoon. You're not under investigation. You're a witness. We'll arrange a secure exit. Victoria's gaze drifted to the elevators, the glass walls, the hundreds of employees unaware the ground had shifted beneath them. Give me 5 minutes, she said. I need to speak to my people. 5, Reed agreed. She turned to Michael. Call comms, internal only. We state facts. We protect everyone who wasn't involved. David spoke softly, his voice a quiet anchor. Ethan's with Mrs. Walsh. I can keep him away until... Bring him, Victoria said quickly, surprising herself, her voice thick with conviction. Let him see the world when it tells the truth. The lobby buzzed with rumors, security holding a loose cordon, phones hovering like fireflies. Victoria stepped onto a small riser, typically reserved for holiday flowers, her presence commanding despite the lack of a prepared speech. Some of you heard what happened upstairs, she began, her voice carrying through the atrium with unshakable clarity. Law enforcement executed warrants in our boardroom. 2 senior executives were arrested. They do not speak for Sterling Ventures. They will never speak for Sterling Ventures again. A ripple passed through the crowd, heads turning, whispers fading. We are not an empire built on shadows, she continued, her words steady, resonant. We are a company built on your work. Your paychecks will clear. Your projects will continue. Our records are being preserved. If anyone asks you to hide anything, refuse. If anyone threatens you, you come to me. Silence fell. Not fear, but the first stirrings of trust taking root. Then a child's voice cut through, bright and unstoppable. Ms. Victoria! Ethan barreled through the crowd, hair wild, backpack bouncing. David followed, scanning faces with a father's steady vigilance. Ethan didn't stop, colliding with Victoria, his small arms wrapping around her waist. For the first time in years, Victoria let herself fold, crouching to hold him tight, the world shrinking to the rhythm of his heartbeat against her ribs. You saved me, she whispered, her voice trembling with gratitude. Ethan pulled back, his expression serious. You saved you. I just told you where the quiet was. David stood close enough to protect, far enough to give space, the storm in his chest finally easing. Agent Reed spoke gently. Ms. Lane, we can escort you now. She smoothed Ethan's hair, looking to David. Come with me, she said, then to Ethan. And you, counselor? I'm not a counselor, he protested, a grin breaking through. You are today, she answered, her voice warm with conviction. The field office was stark. Neutral carpet, plastic cups of water, fluorescent light. No skyline, no mahogany, just raw honesty. Victoria gave her statement, recounting dates, names, and the words Vincent had trusted to the dark. Michael handed over sealed bags. Device A, body audio, Device B, chair audio. Devices C and D cameras. Signed and logged with meticulous care. Reed accepted them, his voice steady. We'll present this to the U.S. Attorney today. First court appearance tomorrow. With these recordings, this case has teeth. Ethan raised his hand, his small voice serious. Will they go to prison? Reed leaned forward, his tone kind but firm. That's up to a judge and jury, but when people steal, we make it hard for them to keep what isn't theirs. Ethan nodded, satisfied. Victoria turned to David, her voice soft. I owe you. He stopped her, his tone gentle but resolute. Don't finish that. Owing turns gratitude into a contract. His voice softened, a rare warmth breaking through. Let it be family instead. Something unguarded passed between them. Recognition, not rescue, a bond forged in the crucible of truth. 8 weeks later, the verdict came. Vincent Gray, guilty on all counts. Laura Bennett, guilty on conspiracy and money laundering after a plea. The judge spoke of trust betrayed, markets that thrive in daylight, and ordinary people harmed by greed. Sentencing would follow, assets forfeited. Outside cameras swarmed, their lenses hungry for sound bites. Victoria paused only once, her voice clear for the microphones. Integrity isn't a slogan. It's payroll. It's pensions. It's the roof over families. Then she walked on, unyielding. On the courthouse steps, Ethan slipped his hand into hers, his touch a quiet anchor. So? He asked. It's over, David answered, his voice steady. The worst part is, now we build the better part. Victoria looked at them, father and son, and felt the grip of her old life loosen, like a chain finally breaking. They walked slowly to the curb, past microphones, past shadows, into a winter sun that had clawed its way through clouds. At the corner, Ethan tugged them to a stop. Can we get pizza? He asked, as if justice needed cheese to hold it together. David laughed, a sound full and free. Kids got priorities. Victoria smiled, not the polished investor smile, but one born in her eyes, spreading warmth through her core. Pizza, she said, then looked to Ethan. And maybe you help me design something for kids who know where the quiet is. His grin was instant, gap-toothed and bright. I can draw it tonight. Good, David said, his voice thick with pride, because tomorrow starts early. They crossed with the light, their shadows braided on the crosswalk. No titles, no glass walls, just the steady rhythm of ordinary steps carrying them from the place where truth was recorded to the simple spaces where healing begins. A red-checkered table, a slice too hot to hold, and a promise no one needed to sign. Behind them, the tower kept breathing. Ahead, a door jingled open, and for the first time in years, the world felt perfectly sized. Snow fell late that winter, draping Chicago in a hush like a white quilt, softening the sharp edges of glass and steel. David stood at the curb before a modest 2-story brick house tucked into a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't grand, but it had a porch swing, a narrow walkway lined with old maples, and a chimney that still carried the faint memory of wood smoke. He shifted Ethan's backpack higher on his shoulder, his voice warm with disbelief. Well, buddy, this is it. What do you think? Ethan's eyes widened, as if beholding a castle. It has a porch, Dad. Can we get a dog? Dogs love porches. David's laugh was rough and full, a sound he hadn't let himself have in years. Let's start with a welcome mat before we add a dog. A sleek black car pulled up, tires crunching against the snow. Victoria stepped out, wrapped in a long wool coat, her breath blooming white in the crisp air. She looked at the house, then at Ethan, then at David, the man who had walked through fire with her. It feels like the right place, she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of a journey ended and a new one begun. David studied her, half expecting the guarded mask of a CEO, but there was none, just a woman who had been bruised, broken, and healed, standing tall. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and fresh paint. The realtor's cozy, now alive with possibility. To David, it was a new beginning. To Ethan, it was running space. The boy darted down hallways, his voice echoing with each discovery. There's a fireplace, a real one. And 2 bedrooms upstairs, Dad. 2. That means one for me and one for... He stopped, cheeks pinking, his eyes flicking to Victoria, hope trembling in his voice. She crouched, reading the unspoken wish in his gaze. For friends, she said gently, or for when I stay late, helping with homework. This house can hold more than walls, Ethan. It can hold us. Ethan's grin broke wide, gap-toothed and fearless, the smile of a boy who no longer needed to hide. David leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, his voice light but thick with emotion. You say that like you're signing a contract. Victoria's gaze held steady, warm and resolute. Not a contract, a promise. The silence that followed was rich, like the pause before music begins, filled with the weight of a shared journey. That evening, they built their first fire. David fumbled with kindling, muttering under his breath until Victoria laughed and nudged him aside. Step aside, janitor. I've handled tougher negotiations than this fireplace. Is that so? David teased, a spark in his eyes. Show me the boardroom strategy for pine logs. The flames caught, small at first, then steady, washing the room in golden warmth. They ate pizza cross-legged on the living room floor, paper plates balanced on knees, hot cheese stretching into laughter. Ethan stuffed a slice into his mouth, his voice muffled but bright. Best pizza ever. Victoria smiled, her eyes alight. That's because victory changes the flavor of everything. David looked at her, really looked, and felt the truth of it. Victory wasn't the headlines or the verdict. It was this. One boy laughing with his mouth full, one woman leaning against the hearth, and the heartbeat of a house learning their names. I keep thinking about what you said that night, Victoria Lane murmured, her voice soft as the fading embers in the fireplace. That boring wins court. So, Mom, David Hart chuckled, a low, warm sound that broke the stillness of their new home. Not my most romantic line. Her eyes met his, bright with a truth she'd long buried. It was perfect, because it was true, and because it was you. He turned toward her, the firelight painting shadows across his face, softening the lines carved by years of loss and quiet resilience. Victoria, he said, his voice steady but tender, we've been standing in other people's storms for so long. What if, just once, we stood still for ourselves? Her breath caught, a fragile pause, and she reached for his hand, their fingers locked together, fitting as if they'd been practicing for years, a quiet vow born of battles shared. Then let's stand still, she whispered, her voice a promise as warm as the hearth. Spring crept into Chicago, slow and patient, buds cracking open on the old maples outside their modest brick house. The porch swing creaked to a new rhythm, swaying with the promise of mornings filled with coffee and evenings rich with conversation. Ethan's laughter spilled from an upstairs window, a melody that wove through the air, free and unburdened. Victoria smiled more often, not the calculated smile of shareholders or strategy, but one born of life, of moments that felt like home. One Saturday, Ethan dragged a box of crayons to the kitchen table, his small hands brimming with purpose. I'm drawing us, he announced, his voice bright with pride. David teased, a grin tugging at his lips. Go easy on the wrinkles, kid. Ethan smirked, undaunted. Don't worry, Dad. I'll make you look younger than you act. Victoria leaned over his shoulder, her breath catching as she saw the paper. 3 stick figures holding hands before a house, a crooked sun blazing above, and beneath their feet, in Ethan's uneven scrawl, the words, home, finally. Her hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes bright with unshed tears, the weight of their journey settling into something soft and sacred. David brushed Ethan's hair back, his voice thick with emotion. Not bad, kid. Not bad at all, Victoria whispered, her gaze lingering on the drawing, a testament to their shared triumph. In that kitchen with crayons scattered, coffee mugs steaming, and the hum of a refrigerator just beginning its life with them, they understood a simple truth. Justice had given them peace, but love, the quiet, ordinary kind, had built them a home. That night, as David turned off the last light and gazed out at the maple-lined street, he whispered, not to any god, not to any boardroom, but to life itself. Thank you for letting me start over. Victoria's arm slipped around him from behind, her warmth steady against his shoulder. Not start over, she murmured, her voice soft but sure. Start home. Upstairs, Ethan dreamed without fear. The quiet he heard no longer a harbinger of danger, but a song of belonging. The fires of their battles had burned away the shadows, leaving only what was warm, human, and unshakably true. A new home, a new family, a new beginning, and it was enough. Their story whispers to us that even in the quietest corners, love can carve out a home. Healing doesn't always arrive with fanfare. It comes in the gentle laughter of a child, the steady warmth of a hand held, the promise of a tomorrow that feels safe and whole. And now I turn to you, wherever you are tonight across this wide world. Where are you reading from? Share your thoughts below. I read every one, and your stories light up my heart as much as this tale. If this journey touched you, join our community of dreamers who believe in hope, kindness, and second chances. Subscribe and stay with us. Thank you truly for giving your time to feel, to remember, to dream alongside these pages. Until the next story, may you carry this light into your own life, bright and unbroken.